The sound of the old cabin floorboard still creaked under my boots as I caught my wife whispering another man's name. As my hand tightened on the doorframe, the same slow creak kept me steady instead of letting our marriage crush me. While that wooden groan lingered in the quiet, it grew louder than every promise she ever made. As it carried through the cabin, I realized it wasn't warning me. It was revealing what our relationship had become. That's when I understood betrayal isn't noise, it's clarity. Still, with that final creak beneath me, I chose the only justice left, walking away free. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Victor Hammond had always been a man who noticed the small things, shifts in tone, changes in patterns, the way silence felt heavier when something unspoken sat behind it. After 40 years in construction, he could sense when a wall wasn't level long before the eye caught it. And lately, something about Claire wasn't level. It started as tiny moments, a sudden flinch when he walked into a room, the way she angled her phone away from him, her laughter coming a little too quickly, too brightly when she was texting someone. She'd become distant in a way she tried to disguise with routine affection, a hand on his arm, a soft kiss on the cheek, conversations that felt rehearsed. But Vic felt the gap widening, like a draft slipping through a door you thought was sealed. That evening when she stood at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables, her phone vibrated twice. She didn't even look up at him. She just slid it face down, leaving the screen to glow faintly under her fingers. Something in her shoulders tightened. That was it, the moment he felt the truth rise in his chest like cold water. Whatever was happening, whoever was on that phone, it wasn't innocent. So he tested her. He walked in casually and wiped his hands on a dish towel, keeping his voice steady. "Claire," he said, "I'm thinking about taking a trip, just a quick one. Maybe 3 days. Visit an old friend up in McCall, haven't seen him in years." Her knife froze mid-slice, just for a second, but it was enough. Claire looked up slowly, her expression caught between surprise and calculation. 3 days, she repeated almost too quickly. Then, realizing her reaction, she softened her voice into something warmer. "That sounds nice, Vic. You haven't had a break in ages." She smiled, too easily, too perfectly. He watched the smile settle on her face like makeup she forgot she was wearing. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Figured it'd be good to clear my head." She nodded, stretched her lips into a practiced affection, and went back to chopping as if nothing had happened. But Vic saw the flicker in her eyes, the calculation behind them, the relief she tried to hide. It told him more than any confession ever could. He packed that night. Not much, just a duffel bag with a few clothes, toiletries, and a thermos for coffee. Claire hovered in the hallway doorway as he zipped it up, arms crossed loosely over her chest. The softness in her voice felt strained when she said, "Tell Michael I said hello," as if she already knew he never would. He kissed her cheek, breathing in the faint floral perfume she'd started wearing only recently, another new habit layered over old ones. "I'll call when I get there," he said. And with that he walked out. But he didn't drive 2 hours north to McCall. He barely drove 5 miles. He took the old forest road on the east side of town, where the trees thickened and the lake stretched out in the distance like a quiet, reflective mirror. He knew the place well. He'd stayed at the little lakeside rental cabins years ago during fishing season. They were simple, nothing fancy, but they were tucked away enough to disappear into. He parked, checked in under a name the owner wouldn't question, and dropped his bag on the wooden floor. The place smelled of pine and dust and faint traces of old campfire smoke. Familiar, grounding, safe. But inside him, nothing felt grounded at all. He sat in the cabin's small kitchen, watching sunlight fade into orange, then dim into blue. The lake outside grew darker with every minute, still and cold. He checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages from Claire. Oddly, that hurt more than any accusation would have. Night settled in fully by the time he poured himself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. He leaned against the railing, feeling the rough wood under his palms. The silence around him should have been peaceful, but instead it let his thoughts echo sharper, crueler. He replayed Claire's reaction in the kitchen, the hesitation, the flicker of worry, the practiced smile. He'd known her long enough to read every expression she tried to bury. Something in her eyes had been wrong. Not guilty, not apologetic, something colder, something that suggested she had been. And waiting for him to leave, hoping for it. And that, more than anything, haunted him now. He exhaled slowly into the night air, his breath forming a faint cloud. Then he straightened, squared his shoulders, and spoke out loud into the empty darkness, his voice low but steady. "Let's see what happens when she thinks I'm gone." The words drifted into the night like a promise or a warning, and he knew there was no turning back now. Vic waited until the sun dipped completely behind the pines before he moved. The cabin sat in total quiet, the kind that felt too calm for what was boiling inside him. He grabbed his truck keys, slipped out the door, and drove with his headlights off until he reached the main road. His hand stayed tight on the wheel, knuckles pale under the glow of the dashboard. He was going back, not to confront, not yet, but to watch, to see the truth with his own eyes. Because part of him still clung to the hope that he had misunderstood everything, that maybe he was being paranoid, that maybe Claire's distance was just stress, or age, or something simple and human. But the deeper truth was already taking root, spreading like rot. He didn't drive all the way home. Instead, he turned onto Maple Ridge Lane and parked 2 streets away, beside the row of tall cedar trees that always shed needles in thick carpets across the pavement. He killed the engine, sat for a moment as his breath fogged lightly on the windshield, then stepped out quietly. The night was cold enough to sting, crisp enough that every sound seemed to travel farther. He walked the rest of the way on foot, shoes crunching softly across gravel, heart pounding with a rhythm that felt too loud for the dark street. Each step made the dread in him coil tighter. He passed the neighbor's yard, Glenn McCoy's place, where an old porch light flickered in its familiar uneven pulse. As Vic approached, the front door creaked open a few inches. Glenn stepped out wearing a thick flannel robe, his silver hair messy. Their eyes met. Glenn didn't ask why Vic was there. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't question. He just gave a slow, knowing nod, one man recognizing the storm in another, and then quietly closed his door again. That silence said more than words could have. Vic swallowed hard and continued. When he reached his house, he stayed low, moving along the side yard where the bushes cast long shadows across the siding. He had lived there for decades. He knew every creak of the deck boards, every beam that held the place up. But tonight the house felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. Then he heard it. Laughter. Not Claire's, a man's. The sound was deep, relaxed, comfortable, too comfortable, like someone who belonged there, someone who felt entitled to be laughing inside Vic's home. Vic froze, his pulse thudding in his ears. He edged closer, creeping under the kitchen window where a warm yellow light glowed against the curtains. He heard Claire's voice then, soft and playful, a tone she hadn't used with him in years. It cut through him with surgical precision. He dared to stand taller, to look through the small gap where the curtain didn't fully meet, and the sight that greeted him hollowed out his chest. Claire stood at the kitchen counter wearing a dress he hadn't seen in years, a deep burgundy one he thought she'd donated ages ago. She wore earrings he didn't recognize and had done her hair in soft curls she never bothered with anymore. She looked younger, alive, but not for him. Across from her sat Evan Barrett. He was leaning casually against the counter, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened like he'd been there 1,000 times. Claire poured wine into 2 tall glasses, her hand brushing Evan's as she passed his. Evan smirked, lifting the glass in a celebratory gesture. Vic felt the ground beneath him tilt. Inside, the 2 of them clinked their glasses lightly. "Here's to freedom," Evan said. Claire echoed it softly, "To freedom." her smile warm, intimate, familiar in a way she never looked at Vic anymore. Something inside Vic snapped, not with a loud crack but with a slow, splitting ache that ran down the center of him. This was Claire having a moment of weakness. This wasn't a flirtation. This wasn't even a romantic escape. It was a celebration. They were toasting something bigger, something planned, something that didn't include him. Their glasses hovered between them, that word, freedom, echoing in Vic's head. He had prepared himself for the possibility of infidelity, for the sting of betrayal, maybe even for heartbreak. But what he was seeing now wasn't two guilty lovers hiding in the shadows. It looked like two conspirators toasting the beginning of a future he wasn't meant to be part of. Vic felt his stomach twist, a sinking weight that made it hard to breathe. His fingers curled into the siding of the house as if he needed something to hold him up. The quiet night around him blurred, the window fogged faintly with the warmth of the kitchen inside, and all Vic could feel was the cold spreading through him. This wasn't just cheating. It was something far worse. And as he backed away slowly, trying to keep his breath silent, one question burned louder than all the rest. If this was their celebration, what exactly were they celebrating him being gone from? The answer was waiting, and Vic knew he had to keep going to find it. Vic lowered himself slowly, carefully, until he was crouched beneath the kitchen window, his back pressed against the cold siding of his own home. The night air was sharp, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and the distant hum of a passing car. But inside the house, inside the home he had built, repaired, and protected for decades, there was a warmth he no longer recognized. Laughter, glasses clinking, the low murmur of voices that cut through him more deeply than the cold ever could. He forced himself to stay still. Breathing was already hard enough. Claire's voice floated through the open window first, light, relaxed, almost giddy. It was a version of her he couldn't remember hearing in years. Not with him, never with him. He leaned closer, barely an inch, just enough to catch the words. "She thinks he's still halfway to McCall," Evan said, his voice thick with amusement. "Honestly, he's clueless, always has been." Vic's jaw tightened. The words hit him square in the chest, not just an insult but a dismissal of the man he had been his entire life, steady, loyal, predictable. The kind of man who believed marriage was a quiet partnership built on trust, not games. Claire laughed. God, she laughed, a full laugh, unguarded, unashamed. "He really is," she said. "He won't realize what hit him." Vic felt something in him crack. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just final, like a beam giving way after years of pressure. He had expected betrayal to hurt, but he never imagined hearing her speak about him like that, coldly, confidently, like he was nothing more than an obstacle she'd finally learned to step around. He steadied himself with one hand against the ground, fingers digging into damp soil. The world inside the window continued without him. Evan's footsteps crossed the kitchen. "We just need to stay on the timeline," he said. "Once the documents are cleared at the office, everything falls into place." Timeline. Documents. Office. None of those words belonged in the vocabulary of an affair. Those were planning words, words that hinted at something structured, deliberate, coordinated. Vic's mind scrambled to piece it together, but the more he listened, the more he realized this wasn't two people acting on impulse. It was two people executing a plan. Claire exhaled softly. "I just want it over with," she said. "I'm tired of pretending, tired of waiting." "You won't have to wait much longer," Evan replied. "By next week we'll have everything ready." Next week. Vic felt heat rush through him, a nauseating mix of betrayal and fury. They weren't just stepping outside the marriage. They were scheduling its destruction like a business appointment. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the record button with a trembling thumb. The red light blinked faintly. He angled the microphone toward the window, praying it would pick up their voices. His hands shook violently, but he couldn't stop. He needed proof. proof of what he heard, proof of what was happening in the house he had built board by board. Then he heard movement, soft, intimate movement. Evan's tone lowered. "Come here," he murmured. Vic's breath caught in his throat. He didn't want to look. God, he didn't want to, but he couldn't stop himself. He lifted his eyes just enough to see through the window's lower edge. Evan leaned in and kissed Claire. Not a hesitant kiss, not a moment of weakness. It was slow, familiar, confident. Claire didn't pull away, she didn't flinch, she didn't hesitate. She kissed him back. Vic's body went numb. His fingers loosened around the phone, he almost dropped it. The sight burned into his mind, a stain that no amount of time would ever wash out. He lowered himself again, pressing the phone close to his chest, eyes squeezed shut as if darkness could soften what he had just seen. Inside, Claire whispered something he couldn't fully make out, but her tone said enough, tender, trusting, intimate in a way she hadn't been with Vic in years. He forced himself to keep recording. His breath shook uneven, rattling against the night air. He felt foolish, old, small, like the man inside that house. The version of Vic Claire had once loved, had died long before tonight, and he was only just now realizing it. He stayed hidden for 1 minute, then another. The voices inside blurred into noise, muffled by the pounding of his own heartbeat. His chest felt tight, too tight, like the night had collapsed around him. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He pushed himself up slowly, careful not to make a sound. His legs felt weak, as if the ground itself shifted beneath him. He stepped back into the shadows, phone still recording in his trembling hand. Each breath he took felt heavier than the last, like the simple act of breathing had become an impossible task. He didn't look back at the window again. He turned and walked away, one step, then another, down the dark side yard, down the quiet street, away from the house that suddenly felt foreign to him. His chest tightened with every step until he felt like he might collapse. He kept walking anyway. Behind him, the laughter inside his home drifted faintly into the night. And ahead of him, only one thought formed clearly through the haze of heartbreak. If they had a timeline, what exactly was about to happen to him? Vic didn't remember the drive back to the lakeside cabin. He didn't remember turning the key in the ignition or backing out quietly, or the way the streetlights slid across the hood of his truck like slow-moving shadows. All he remembered was the weight in his chest, a pressure so heavy it felt like something inside him was collapsing. By the time he reached the cabin and stepped inside, his legs were stiff, his fingers numb, and his breath shallow, uneven. He shut the door behind him, locked it, and stood in the darkness for a moment. The silence pressed against him, thick and suffocating. Then, with hands that trembled more than he wanted to admit, he pulled out his phone and sat at the small kitchen table. The surface was cool beneath his arms. He swallowed hard, clicked on the audio file he had recorded, and pressed play. Claire's laughter filled the room. It cut through him sharper than a blade. He listened to Evan's voice next, mocking, confident, dripping with the kind of arrogance that came from believing a man like Vic was too old, too slow, too blind to see what was happening right in front of him. "He's clueless, always has been." Vic's jaw clenched. Then Claire's voice followed, soft, warm, familiar, and suddenly poisoned. "He won't realize what hit him." He paused the recording, but the words lingered inside him like smoke. He stared at the wooden tabletop, breathing through his teeth, every inhale tight and painful. How long had this been happening? How long had they been planning whatever it was they were scheming? And how long had Claire been looking at him with that practiced affection while secretly handing pieces of their life to someone else? He forced himself to replay it, once, twice, 3 times. Each repetition felt like peeling back another layer of the life he thought he had. Claire's voice wasn't hesitant. It wasn't conflicted. It was decisive, ready, almost eager. She wasn't being manipulated into this. She was participating, actively, fully. His mind spiraled through memories, quiet breakfasts, long drives, anniversary dinners, the nights she claimed she was working late. All of them suddenly fractured, recolored, reframed. Betrayal didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It seeped in like water through a cracked foundation. And Vic realized he had missed every sign until it was too late. His phone buzzed. The sharp vibration jolted him. A message from Glenn. Glenn saw someone leaving your house earlier, not her. Vic closed his eyes. The image of Evan Barrett stepping into his home flickered behind his eyelids. Evan moving through rooms Vic had painted himself, sitting in chairs he had built, drinking wine Claire had once shared with her husband. Vic typed back quickly, fingers stiff. Vic, doing some repairs. Don't worry about it. He deleted the first reply he had typed, one that said, I saw everything. He wasn't ready to let anyone know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Not until he understood the full picture of what Claire and Evan were planning. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Claire. Her name on the screen felt like a punch to the ribs. He stared at the call for a long moment, considering ignoring it. But curiosity, dread, and anger twisted inside him, pushing him to swipe and lift the phone to his ear. Hey, Claire said softly, her voice coated with sweetness so thick it bordered on syrup. Did you make it up to McCall okay? Vic felt his breath hitch, not from pain but from fury. Because now he was listening not as her husband, but as a man who had heard her real voice only an hour earlier. Yeah, Vic said evenly, just got in. She hummed lightly. Good, I was worried, roads get dark out there. Her concern sounded rehearsed, placed, delivered with perfect timing. Claire went on talking, asking what he packed, what he planned to eat, telling him she missed him already. The lies slid out of her effortlessly, each one sounding smoother than the last. And Vic realized she had practiced this tone. She had rehearsed these responses. She had built an entire performance around him, confident he'd never question a thing. Every word she spoke now felt like a thread snapping. Get some rest, Claire said. Ently, you sound tired. I will, Vic replied, steady as a man walking a tightrope. When the call ended, the silence returned, heavier, sharper, this time vibrating with anger that had been earned, not imagined. Vic stared at the dark window, at his reflection staring back at him. The man he saw wasn't clueless, wasn't blind, wasn't old or slow or predictable. He was just awake now. Fully. And something inside him shifted, away from heartbreak, away from disbelief, away from grief. Rage settled in. Cold, clear, focused. The test was over. The pretending was over. The man Claire believed she could outsmart was gone. Now Vic wanted answers, real answers, all of them. And he wasn't leaving that cabin again until he knew exactly how deep her betrayal went and how far they planned to take it. Vic barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's face through the window, smiling at Evan, pouring wine, laughing at the joke that he was clueless. The betrayal played on a loop in his mind, but underneath the emotional wreckage was something colder, sharper, more calculating. Evan had mentioned documents at the office, a timeline, things that didn't sound like romance, they sounded like logistics. Vic sat at the cabin's small wooden table just before dawn, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him, his laptop open. He hadn't logged into their joint account in months, maybe longer. Claire had always handled bills and day-to-day banking, not because he was incapable, but because she insisted she liked keeping things organized. Back then, he thought it was helpful. Now, he wondered if it had been strategic. He entered the password slowly. When the homepage loaded, Vic froze. The balance was lower than he remembered, much lower. He leaned closer, scrolling through the past year's activity. The withdrawals weren't big. They weren't dramatic. They were small, tiny, almost invisible amounts taken out every couple of weeks. $40 here, $60 there, $100 now and then, all of them logged as nondescript transfers. Nothing that would raise alarms. Nothing that felt unusual until you looked at 12 months lined up in a row. Vic did the math under his breath, his voice barely above a whisper. 7,008, almost 10. His stomach tightened. Nearly $10,000 gone without a single conversation, without a single explanation. His pulse picked up as he clicked deeper, tracing the path of the transfers. At first, he thought maybe Claire was paying a secret credit card or covering some family issue she hadn't wanted to burden him with. But the routing information led somewhere else. A separate account. Not in Claire's name. Not in any name Vic recognized. He clicked the details, his blood running cold when the page expanded. Account holder, Barrett Lucas R. Barrett, Evan's brother. Vic felt his throat go dry. His hand hovered over the trackpad, trembling as he reread the name, making sure he wasn't seeing things. Lucas Barrett, Evan's younger brother. A man Vic had never met, never spoken to, never had reason to know. And yet Claire had been funneling money into an account under his name. This wasn't casual. This wasn't impulsive. It was intentional. His breathing grew shallow as the truth unfolded inside him like a bruise spreading under skin. Claire and Evan weren't just having an affair. They were moving his money, depleting joint assets, quietly, methodically, playing the long game to gut him before he even realized he was bleeding. Vic rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the stubble against his palm, grounding himself. Then, driven by something instinctual, something colder than rage, he opened a new tab and began searching property records. Evan had mentioned documents at the office. Claire had talked about things being over soon. He typed Claire's name. The county property system loaded slowly, each second stretching into something unbearable. Then a file appeared. Vic clicked it. The document opened with a crisp city seal and a long block of text. He scanned it once, confused, then a second time, reading every line carefully, meticulously. Claire Hammond. Co-signer. Condo Unit 1407. Downtown Boise. Vic leaned back, eyes wide, throat tightening again. Claire had co-signed for a condo, newly built, expensive, in her name and Lucas Barrett S. Not Evan S., but Evan's brother S. Another layer of distance, another barrier protecting them from detection. It hit him then. She was setting up a life without him, a home without him, using his money to secure it, preparing to walk away from decades together while leaving him financially stranded, stripped, weakened. A sharp breath escaped him, almost like a gasp, but quieter. He pressed shaking fingers to his forehead, trying to hold himself steady. Pieces fell into place, Evan's smug confidence, Claire's eagerness, the rehearsed sweetness in her voice. It wasn't just an affair, it was infrastructure, a financial escape route, a blueprint. NT for erasing him. She wasn't planning to hurt him emotionally. She was planning to ruin him. Vic stared at the condo contract, the numbers, the signatures, the confirmation of everything he feared but hadn't been able to articulate. His jaw tightened so hard it hurt. "She gutted us," he whispered. He said it once quietly. Then again louder, voice cracking with disbelief and fury. "You didn't just cheat." His eyes burned, filled with something raw and electric and painful. "You gutted us." The words hung in the cabin's still air, echoing off the wooden walls like a confession no one else would ever hear. Vic closed the laptop slowly, deliberately, as if he were sealing something away. But there was no peace in the motion, only resolve. The emotional betrayal had been devastating. But this financial ambush changed everything. It meant Claire wasn't just lying. She was dismantling his life piece by piece behind his back. And as the early morning light spilled across the cabin floor, Vic felt something shift deep inside him. An awakening, a clarity sharper than anger and stronger than grief. He needed a plan now. Not a test. Not a guess. A plan. Because if Claire and Evan had been working in secret for nearly a year, Vic knew he had no idea just how far their betrayal went. And he was done being in the dark. Vic woke before sunrise, mind still burning from what he'd uncovered. The condo, the hidden account, the quiet funneling of money into a stranger's name, all orchestrated by the woman he had once trusted more than anyone. If he still had any doubt about their intentions, it evaporated with the first light creeping through the cabin's curtains. He showered, dressed in plain clothes, dark jacket, worn boots, and drove into town with the kind of calm focus a man gets after being pushed past heartbreak and into clarity. Rage was still there, simmering just beneath his ribs, but it was no longer wild, no longer directionless. It had settled into something sharper. He wasn't confronting Claire today. He was watching her. He parked across from her workplace, a commercial building that housed half a dozen small offices, insurance, real estate, accounting. Claire had worked there for nearly 15 years. He had dropped her off countless times, watched her walk through those glass doors with a kiss on the cheek, trusting she was exactly where she said she'd be. Now he waited in the shadow of a nearby hardware store, cap pulled low, eyes tracking every movement in the lot. At 8:12 a.m., Claire's silver SUV pulled in. She stepped out dressed with a level of effort rarely used for work. Hair curled, makeup clean, blouse tucked neatly into a tailored skirt. She glanced around the lot once, twice, scanning in a way that made Vic's pulse quicken. She wasn't looking for danger. She was looking for someone specific. A black sedan appeared moments later, Evan Barrett. He parked 2 spaces down from her and climbed out with a confidence that made Vic's jaw clench. Evan walked straight to her, close, familiar, unafraid of being seen. There was no guilt on either of their faces. Only purpose. Vic slid lower in his seat as Evan handed Claire a thick manila folder. The tab at the top was bold, typed in block letters. Phase 2. Claire opened it quickly, flipping through pages. Vic leaned forward, eyes narrowing. It was only a few seconds, but it was enough. He saw the bold headings, the legal text, the notary blocks. He recognized the layout instantly. Divorce asset transfer forms. His stomach hardened. His chest tightened. He'd seen those documents before when friends had gone through breakups. He knew exactly what they were. Paperwork designed to shift accounts, freeze assets, designate ownership, and strategically corner a spouse. Claire didn't read them. She didn't hesitate. She just pulled a pen from her purse and began signing on the highlighted lines while Evan hovered beside her, scanning the lot like a lookout. Twice she looked over her shoulder. Not because she sensed Vic. Because she was afraid someone might recognize the two of them together. But not afraid enough to stop. When she finished signing, she handed the papers back. Evan tucked them neatly into the folder and clapped her softly on the back, a gesture that made Vic's vision blur for a moment with raw fury. This wasn't passion. This wasn't romance. This was execution. Claire had every intention of blindsiding him legally, cleanly, swiftly, and without warning. She was preparing to cut him off from his own home, his own savings, his own retirement. Not next year. Not someday. Now. Vic forced himself to stay still, to let the scene unfold without acting on the wildfire burning inside him. He watched Claire touch Evan's arm before walking toward the building entrance. Evan lingered behind long enough to text someone, then drove away as if the morning's transaction was as routine as a stop for coffee. Vic waited until Claire disappeared inside. Then he exhaled, slow, long, steady. The breath of a man who knew the ground beneath him had officially cracked open. He started the truck, but he didn't leave. Not yet. He pulled out his phone and recorded a voice note describing exactly what he'd witnessed, names, times, actions. He zoomed in and snapped photos of the folder label, Claire's signature on one exposed page, the two of them standing too close in the lot. Every piece mattered now. Paper trail, digital trail, time-stamped evidence. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It wasn't about emotions or shock or disbelief. This was about survival. Vic spent the next hour driving quietly through Boise, stopping at the bank to request printed statements, then swinging by the county records office to gather public documents about the condo. Every step chipped away at the man he used to be and replaced him with someone harder, someone smarter, someone unrecognizable even to himself. The rage he carried no longer made his hands shake. It had settled into his spine, into his jaw, into his silence. By noon, Vic sat in his truck again, documents spread across the passenger seat, proof of betrayal layered on top of proof, ink and signatures building into a picture he could no longer ignore. He stared out the windshield, watching people walk to their cars, living their normal lives. For a brief, surreal moment, he envied them. Then he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Claire thought she could dismantle his life quietly. Evan thought he was blind. But now Vic had evidence. And evidence would become leverage. He started the truck again, a new resolve filling him, steady, cold, unshakable. Rage was no longer running the show. Strategy was. And he knew exactly who he needed to see next. Detective Lana Rhodes didn't look like the kind of person who wasted time. When Vic walked into the precinct, clutching a folder full of documents that felt like they weighed more than his own body, she glanced up from her desk with a calm, assessing expression. She wasn't warm, but she wasn't cold either. Just steady, grounded, the way someone had to be when they spent their life sorting lies from truth. "You're Victor Hammond?" she asked, standing to shake his hand. Vic nodded, clearing his throat. "Yeah, thank you for seeing me on short notice." Rhodes motioned him toward the chair across from her, her eyes already scanning the folder he placed on the desk. "You said this was about suspected financial misconduct." Vic hesitated. He wasn't sure where to begin, whether to start with Claire's affair, the hidden account, the condo, or the recordings of her laughing at how easy he was to fool. His voice felt heavy, as if betrayal had weight. "It's bigger than I know how to explain," he said finally. He slid the first set of papers across the desk, bank statements, withdrawals, transfers, then the document showing the condo Claire had co-signed with Evan's brother. Last, he placed his phone down, open to the audio recording from the night before. Detective Rhodes listened without interrupting. She didn't blink when Evan mocked Vic. She didn't flinch when Claire talked about the timeline. She didn't look away when the voices shifted into something unmistakably intimate. When it ended, she leaned back slowly in her chair and exhaled through her nose. "This isn't just infidelity," she said. "This is fraud, potential conspiracy, possible identity misuse." Vic swallowed. Hearing it framed in legal terms only made it feel darker. Rhodes tapped one of the statements. "These withdrawals look structured, purposeful. It's the kind of pattern people use when they're trying not to trigger fraud alerts." She flipped to the condo file. "And this, co-signing property under someone else's sibling, that's not normal at all." She looked him in the eye. "You came at the right time." For a moment, Vic almost let out a breath of relief, but it caught halfway, stuck behind a truth he hadn't told her yet. He rubbed his hands together, bracing himself. "I haven't confronted her," he admitted. "Not once. She thinks I'm in McCall. She doesn't know I know anything." Rhodes nodded slowly. "Good." "Good?" Vic asked, surprised. Her voice lowered, deliberate. "Your silence is your power. Confronting her now means they go underground. It means lost evidence, altered accounts, hidden documents." She leaned forward. "You want this handled legally, then you stay quiet. Let me investigate." Vic stared at the desk, absorbing the advice. Silence. It wasn't a word he associated with strength, but right now it felt like armor. Detective Rhodes gathered the documents neatly, organizing them as she spoke. "I'll start running background checks, asset searches, and cross-referencing those transfer accounts. And I'll reach out to an attorney who can guide you through the marital and estate side." Just hearing someone say the word estate made Vic's chest tighten. Claire had been preparing to carve him up financially. A man could stomach heartbreak, but losing his home, his security, his life savings, that was a different kind of violence. Before Vic could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from Glenn. "Glenn, got something you need to see." "Glenn, footage from my porch camera. Evan's been at your place more than you think." Vic felt his stomach drop again, not with surprise, but with recognition. Pieces were falling into place faster than he could process them. "Excuse me," he said to Rhodes. "My neighbor, he saw things." Rhodes raised an eyebrow. "Bring me anything he has. It could reinforce the timeline." Vic stepped out into the hall and called Glenn. The man answered on the second ring, voice low. "I didn't want to say anything until I knew what I was looking at," Glenn said. "But Evan's been over there late, real late, different nights. Sometimes Claire wasn't even home yet." Vic's breath caught. Evan in his house without Claire. That meant something else was going on, something deeper than just an affair. "Send me everything," Vic said. Within a minute, Glenn's videos started arriving. Grainy night clips of Evan Barrett entering Vic's house with a spare key, staying for long stretches, leaving with files tucked under his arm. Vic returned to Rhodes's office and set the phone down in front of her. She clicked through each video, her expression tightening. "This isn't cheating," she said finally. "This is coordinated, planned. They're building something together and removing you from the picture." Vic felt a chill settle through him, slow and heavy. A picture was forming. And the final image wasn't just betrayal. It was something far worse. Vic waited until the neighborhood had gone still, until the last porch light flickered off and the late summer hum of insects became the only sound between the houses. He parked 2 blocks away, the truck angled between tall hedges where the street curved. From there, he could watch his own home without being seen. He wasn't sure what he expected tonight. Maybe nothing. Maybe a quiet house, a quiet wife, a quiet lie. But every instinct in him, the ones that had built decades of successful contracting work, told him otherwise. Patterns meant everything. And Claire had a pattern now, acting normal by day, disappearing by night. Just after 11:40 p.m. the front door opened. Claire stepped out, dressed not for sleep, not for comfort, but for someone else. A fitted blouse, dark jeans, makeup still sharp from work, hair brushed carefully, more effort than she ever made when they had late dinners together. Vic sank lower behind the steering wheel, watching her lock the door, glance up and down the street, then walk briskly to her SUV. The motion sensor light blinked on, briefly washing her in white. She didn't look guilty. She looked focused. The engine started softly, and she pulled out of the driveway. Vic waited a beat, then 2, then eased his truck into gear and followed her at a distance, keeping enough space that she'd never notice the familiar headlights in her mirror. The drive into downtown Boise felt longer than usual. Each red light felt like a countdown. Each turn she made was another nail hammered into a truth he could no longer deny. When she finally pulled into the parking lot of a sleek condo building with mirrored windows, Vic felt his stomach twist. He recognized the street, the same area where the condo she'd co-signed was located, the condo tied to Evan's brother. She parked in a guest spot, walked straight to a secured side entrance, dialed in a code with practiced confidence. And the door buzzed open. Vic's breath left him like a punch to the ribs. He parked across the street, slipped out quietly, and moved between shadows until he found a place near the entrance where the sound carried best, behind a row of tall planters, hidden but close enough to hear. 5 minutes passed. Then the door opened again. This time, Evan Barrett stepped out into the hallway, greeting her with the kind of familiarity people earned over months, not weeks. "Cutting it close tonight," Evan murmured. Claire rolled her eyes playfully. "He thinks I'm asleep." Vic felt heat grip his spine, rage and humiliation mixing, until he had to clench his jaw to keep from reacting. They walked deeper into the condo unit. Vic followed quietly around the side, staying close to the wall where the windows were slightly cracked for ventilation. Their voices drifted out, clearer now. Claire spoke first, her tone all business. "We need to make sure he signs the papers this weekend." Vic's chest tightened. Papers, the divorce trap. She said it like a task on a checklist, like asking him to rake leaves or change a light bulb. Evan laughed under his breath. "He will, just keep playing nice. Don't spook him, let him think everything's normal." Play nice. Vic felt those two words sink like hooks into him. Claire replied softly, confidently, with zero hesitation. "He's old, predictable, easy." Easy. The word echoed through Vic's skull like a slap. His face burned, shame and anger twisting through his bloodstream so fast his hands began to shake. He pressed his back to the wall to keep himself steady. He wasn't listening as her husband tonight. He was listening as a man being carved apart in absentia. Evan continued, pacing lightly across the room. "By Sunday, we'll have everything lined up. Lucas has the accounts ready. Once the transfers are pushed through, you'll be protected." Protected? As if Vic were the danger. As if he were the threat she needed shielding from. Claire sighed, a tired, exasperated sound. "I just want it done. I'm not dragging this out any longer. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. He always does." Vic closed his eyes, breath trembling. That was who she thought he was, someone who didn't question, didn't resist, didn't see. Someone whose trust made him weak. He slipped his phone out of his pocket, hands shaking as he tapped record. He angled it toward the open window, capturing every word, every cruel assumption, every detail they so casually laid out. The recording light blinked red. Their voices continued, talk of timing, moving belongings, coordinating accounts, but Vic didn't take his eyes off the phone. Each second of audio felt like another crack in the foundation of the life he'd built. Finally, when there was nothing left he could stomach hearing, he stopped the recording and stepped away from the condo slowly, careful not to make a sound. His breath came shallow, unsteady, his chest tight. He felt sick, not from shock but from the scale of the betrayal. He walked back to his truck on legs that barely felt like they belonged to him. He had all the proof he needed. He had the recordings. He knew the plan. But none of it eased the humiliation settling inside him like a weight. He gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles whitening as he stared through the windshield. Now he had to decide what to do next. And whatever decision he made, the time for pretending was over. Judith Hale's office sat on the top floor of an older brick building downtown, the kind of place where everything, from the dark wood furniture to the heavy framed diplomas, felt deliberate, sturdy, immovable. Vic walked in gripping a folder so tightly his knuckles were white. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He felt like a man held together by willpower alone, trying not to crumble before he got the help he needed. A receptionist led him inside. Judith Hale, late 50s, sharp eyes, iron-gray hair pulled back into a neat twist, stood as he entered. She extended a hand that was firm, steady, and gave him the smallest nod, as if she'd seen men in his position before. Men whose lives were crumbling quietly beneath them. "You must be Victor Hammond," she said. "Detective Rhodes spoke highly of you. Have a seat." Vic lowered himself into the leather chair, the folder trembling slightly in his lap. "Thanks for making time," he said, voice thick, strained. Judith took the folder, opened it, and began sifting through its contents. Bank statements, property records, the secret condo, the transfers in Lucas Barrett's name, and at the bottom, the audio recordings. She listened to them through headphones, jaw tightening inch by inch. Vic watched her expression shift from curiosity to concern to something bordering on disbelief. When she finally took off the headphones, she leaned back slowly in her chair. For a moment, she didn't speak. She seemed to be collecting her thoughts, piecing together the tangled web Claire and Evan had built. "Mr. Hammond," she said carefully, "what you've uncovered here isn't just marital misconduct. This is coordinated fraud." Vic swallowed, feeling his heart pound in his chest. Hearing it from a detective was one thing. Hearing it from an attorney, someone who could quantify the destruction Claire had planned, felt different. He braced himself. Judith pointed to one stack of bank statements. These transfers, they were structured intentionally to avoid detection, and the amount, nearly $10,000, suggests long-term planning. She lifted the property records next. This condo co-signed with Evan's brother. That's financial concealment, intentional asset diversion. Then she showed him a page he hadn't seen before, his own signature on a document he had never signed. Vic blinked hard, leaning forward. "That's not mine," he whispered. "I know," Judith said. "It's a forgery, a clumsy one, but enough that without investigation a court clerk might not question it." The room seemed to tilt slightly, his stomach dropping. She pushed the document aside and folded her hands. "Your wife," Judith said, her tone firm but controlled, "is preparing a legal trap designed to blindside you. Her objective is clear. She wants alimony, she wants half your assets, and she wants to walk away with control of your joint financial life." Vic felt a wave of nausea roll through him. "Half," he repeated, "after everything." "She's building a narrative where you appear financially dominant, emotionally distant, and easy to manipulate into signing documents. Evan is guiding her. This Phase 2 paperwork in the parking lot, those were asset transfer forms." Vic stared at the desk, fighting to keep his composure. His hands felt cold. Judith's voice sharpened. "But you're here early enough to stop it, and we're going to do exactly that." She reached for a set of forms from her drawer, urgent, official, thick with legal weight. "First," she said, "we file emergency injunctions to freeze all accounts, yours and hers, so she can't move another dollar." She slid the next form forward. "Second, we secure your property titles. Your house cannot be transferred, refinanced, or touched without your explicit permission." Another form, another lifeline. "Third, we notify financial institutions that you suspect identity misuse. This protects your credit, your pension, and any line of equity." Vic nodded slowly, absorbing every word, feeling something shift ins. Eyed him, less fear, more control. Judith leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You're not the victim here, Mr. Hammond. You're the one who caught them. Now let's make that count." He signed the documents one by one, hands steadying with every stroke of the pen. Paper after paper, initial after initial, he felt something anchoring him, like invisible chains were being cut from his wrists. When the last form was done, he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Judith gathered everything neatly. "I'll file these within the hour. Claire will likely receive notification by tomorrow morning." Vic nodded again. "What do I do until then?" "Exactly what you've been doing," Judith said. "Stay silent. She can't outmaneuver what she doesn't know you know." Vic's phone buzzed suddenly. He glanced down. A message from Claire. "Claire, miss you, come home soon," read. The heart emoji felt like a blade. His stomach lurched. His vision blurred for a moment, not from tears but from the sheer cruelty of the lie. Hours after plotting to gut him financially, she was sending affection like nothing was wrong. Judith watched his expression darken. "Let me guess," she said softly. "She's pretending everything is normal." Vic swallowed hard, the taste of bitterness thick on his tongue. "Yeah," he whispered, "normal." He locked the screen, unable to look at the message again. As he stood to leave, Judith's voice followed him, calm, steady, grounding. Stay the course, Vic. You're not just uncovering lies anymore, you're dismantling them. Vic nodded once, jaw clenched, heart pounding. He was ready. But tomorrow, when Claire's world started to shift, he knew everything between them would begin collapsing for real. Detective Lana Rhodes called Vic just after 9 the next morning. Her voice was calm, clipped, but there was something underneath it, a tension he hadn't heard before. "Mr. Hammond," she said, "I need you to come in now." Vic didn't ask questions. He grabbed his jacket, locked the cabin behind him, and drove straight to the precinct. The drive felt longer than usual, the weight in his chest growing heavier with every passing mile. He had thought he already understood the scale of what Claire and Evan were doing, but the edge in Rhodes's voice suggested something worse, something that reached farther back than their affair. When he arrived, Rhodes was standing outside her office with a file in her hand, tapping it lightly against her palm. She motioned him in with a quick gesture, closed the door behind them, and nodded toward the chair. "Before I show you this," she said, "I want you to understand one thing. What I found was sealed for a reason." Vic felt his pulse thicken. Sealed. "Yes," Rhodes opened the file, her eyes narrowing. "Because 12 years ago, Evan Barrett was involved in a fraud case, a major one." Vic leaned forward, his breath catching. Rhodes placed a set of photocopied documents on the desk between them. Court records, bank logs, investigation summaries, each stamped with a faint watermark indicating sealed status. Rhodes continued. He targeted a woman he was dating at the time, someone older, financially stable, lonely. She glanced at Vic. "Sound familiar?" Vic's stomach turned. "He gained her trust," Rhodes said. "Convinced her to invest in a business he claimed he was starting. Slowly transferred funds from joint accounts to a private one under a different name. His cousin that time, not his brother." Vic's jaw tightened. A pattern, a blueprint. Rhodes flipped another page. When she got suspicious, he vanished. Clean. Took nearly $40,000 with him. "And they didn't find him?" Vic asked, voice low. "They did," Rhodes replied, "2 states away. But the woman refused to testify. She was too embarrassed. She settled privately. In exchange for silence, the case was sealed." Vic stared at the file, his throat tightening. Evan hadn't just manipulated Claire. He had done this before, almost identically, and he'd walked away without consequences. Rhodes slid her phone across the table next, and it gets worse. On the screen were screenshots, copies of messages pulled from Evan's digital history. Rhodes tapped one. "This," she said, "is a conversation between Evan and his brother." Vic read the lines slowly, every word driving a spike deeper into him. "Evan, she's naive leverage. Nothing more. Just need her to push the papers and keep the old man comfortable until it's done." Naive leverage. Leverage. Not love. Not a partner. Not even a person. Vic swallowed hard, hands curling into fists. Claire had betrayed him deeply, deliberately, cruelly. But Evan had been betraying her too, using her, guiding her, setting her up to take the blame while he walked away clean again. Rhodes pointed at another message. "He's planning to drain both of you. The hidden account, the condo, those are staging grounds. Once enough assets are moved, Evan intended to disappear." Vic shut his eyes briefly, imagining Claire signing documents she barely understood, believing she was orchestrating her great escape, when in reality, Evan had been positioning her as a shield. "He used her," Vic whispered. "Yes," Rhodes said, "completely." Vic opened his eyes, the shock fading into something quieter, colder. She continued, "Claire thinks they're building a future, but Evan is planning to let her take the fall for everything. The fraudulent transfers are in her name. The forged signature is in her handwriting. The condo is tied to your marital estate, not his." Vic stared at the ceiling, a strange mixture of emotions churning inside him. Anger, yes. Betrayal, absolutely. But now there was something else, pity. Not soft, not forgiving, but sharp. Claire had betrayed him, but she had also been blind. She had fallen for a man who saw her as a stepping stone, nothing more. She doesn't know, Vic said quietly. No, Rhodes replied, she doesn't. The room felt heavy with the truth. Vic thought of Claire's laughter through the window, her confidence in Evan, her certainty that they had a plan. She believed she was the clever one. She believed she was leaving Vic behind for someone better. But she didn't realize she was walking straight into a trap. A trap Evan had perfected years ago. Rhodes folded her hands. I can move forward with a fraud investigation, but I need you to stay invisible. Evan can't know we're onto him yet. Vic nodded slowly. I understand. Rhodes held his gaze. And remember, your silence is still your advantage. Vic looked down at the file again, at the evidence of Evan's past and the cruelty he'd refined over time. Claire had made her choices. She had chosen deceit. She had chosen Evan over her marriage, over truth, over loyalty. And now she was about to learn what that choice cost. Vic stood steady, controlled. Do what you need to do, he said. As he stepped out of the office, the weight of everything settled deeper inside him, not as grief, not as disbelief, but as resolve. Claire wasn't just a betrayer. She was a pawn. But she had placed herself there. And Vic wasn't stepping in to save her from it. Not anymore. Claire called Vic late in the afternoon, her voice honey-sweet and impossibly calm, so calm it almost sounded rehearsed. Hey, love, she said. Since you're coming back tomorrow, how about dinner tonight instead? I made a pot roast, your favorite. Vic stood in the cabin's kitchen, staring at the phone as if it were a piece of evidence itself. She said it lightly, warmly, as though she hadn't spent the last several nights in Evan's condo planning to strip him of everything he owned. But he forced his voice into something smooth, relaxed, almost grateful. That sounds perfect, Claire. I'll head home in a bit. Oh, good, she said gently. I miss you. Vic swallowed the bitterness. I miss you too. He ended the call and exhaled slowly. He didn't miss her. Not the version she'd become, the liar, the strategist, the woman whose laughter with Evan still echoed painfully in his mind. But he had to pretend. Hale and Rhodes were right. Silence was his power. As much as he wanted to confront her, drag the truth out of her, watch every lie fall apart, he couldn't. Not yet. He drove home just before dusk, the sky bruised blue and purple. Claire was waiting on the porch, arms folded lightly, smiling in a way that would have fooled anyone who didn't know what she was doing. There you are, she said, stepping forward to hug him. Vic let her. He kept his arms soft, his expression warm. She smelled like the same floral perfume she'd worn on the night he saw her with Evan, light, sweet, intentionally placed. Long drive, he said, patting her back. Claire pulled away and searched his face subtly, like she was looking for cracks. He let his expression stay open, tired but content. She relaxed instantly, shoulders loosening. Come on, she said, dinner's ready. Inside, the house smelled familiar, rich pot roast, warm bread, a scent that used to mean comfort. Now it only reminded him how easily she could play the part. They sat across from each other, candles lit, wine poured, the table set in a way she hadn't bothered with in years. She kept studying him, almost too often, like she was waiting for him to slip and reveal something. But Vic stayed calm. He ate slowly, asked simple questions, told her the roads up north were clear. He even smiled once or twice. He had never acted in his life, but tonight he performed like a man who had everything to lose. At one point she reached across the table, squeezing his hand gently. I'm glad you're home, she said softly. Vic smiled back steady. Me too. In the wineglass beside her he caught a faint reflection, her phone screen lighting up under the table. She slipped her hand down casually, pretending to brush a wrinkle from her skirt, but Vic saw it. The glow, the angle, the quick movement of her thumb. It was a text. From Evan. She read it without lifting the phone fully into V. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She hid it quickly, but not quickly enough. Vic felt something burn through him. Anger mixed with complete disbelief that she could sit there, play the devoted wife, and text her lover about destroying him while eating his favorite meal. Still, he held the mask. After dinner, Claire stood abruptly. "Shoot," she said lightly. "I left some documents in the car. I'll be right back." Vic nodded slowly. "Take your time." She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door, keys jingling. As soon as it shut behind her, Vic's heartbeat quickened. Something inside him nudged him. Instinct, intuition, maybe just years of knowing her better than she knew herself. He stepped quietly to the purse she'd left on the counter. Slowly, carefully, he opened it. Inside were the usual things: wallet, makeup bag, a few receipts. But tucked into a side pocket was something that didn't belong: a small black prepaid phone. No case. No contacts saved on screen. No personalization at all. A burner phone. Vic stared at it, breath frozen in his chest. That meant secrecy. That meant Evan. That meant conversations she didn't want traced, not by him, not by authorities, not by anyone. The front door opened. Vic quickly slipped the phone back, closed the purse, and moved to the sink just as she stepped inside. "Got it," she said cheerfully, holding a manila envelope. "Just some bills we need to go over this weekend." He nodded lightly, turning off the faucet as if he hadn't moved at all. They talked a few minutes longer before she went upstairs to shower. The moment she disappeared, Vic stepped into the living room and dialed Judith Hale. She answered on the second ring. "Hale." "It's Vic," he whispered. She's using a burner hidden in her purse." Hale inhaled sharply. "All right, listen carefully, do not confront her." Vic gripped the phone tighter. "But—" "Not yet," she cut in firmly. "You're sitting in a minefield. One wrong step and everything collapses. Keep playing along. Let her think the trap is still hers." Vic exhaled shakily. "Okay." "And Vic," Hale added, voice low and steady, "you're doing everything right. But tonight, don't slip. She's watching you closer than ever." He hung up, the house thick with silence. Upstairs, Claire hummed softly in the shower, calm, confident, unafraid. Vic stood alone in the dim light of the living room, jaw tight, hands trembling, one final realization settling in. The trap wasn't hers anymore. It was his. Judith Hale moved faster than Vic expected. By the time morning settled over the neighborhood, she had already filed a full suite of emergency injunctions, freezing every account Claire had quietly drained, every funnel she'd opened, every financial backdoor she thought Evan had safely built for her. Vic sat in her office while she made the final calls, listening to her voice turn crisp, cold, surgical. Yes, Judge Hall approved it at 8:14 a.m. Correct, all secondary accounts in her name are immediately frozen. Yes, including the ones tied to Lucas Barrett. Every sentence felt like a hammer quietly striking metal, precision work, controlled force. Vic didn't say much. He just sat with his hands clasped, breathing slowly, feeling the quiet power of something shifting back in his favor. When they left the courthouse, Detective Rhodes was waiting beside her unmarked car. She held a folder under one arm, her expression unreadable. "I got the subpoena," she said. "We're pulling all records from Evan's condo, leases, visitors, surveillance logs, even maintenance requests." Vic raised an eyebrow. "Maintenance?" "Fraud guys get sloppy," Rhodes said. "Sometimes they hide things where they think no one's looking." She turned to Vic, her tone more serious. "You're going to see things you won't like, but everything we're gathering closes the loop." Vic nodded steady. "Whatever it takes." After they parted ways, Vic drove home with a heaviness in his chest, a strange mix of dread and resolve. He wasn't scared anymore. He wasn't confused. and he wasn't playing the fool Claire believed him to be. Hale's filings gave him new legal authority over the property. That meant one simple, symbolic task was now 100% legal. He changed the locks. It felt surreal, standing in his own doorway, drill whining softly, metal unscrewing with each turn. He had replaced locks hundreds of times for clients across Boise, but never for his own protection, never against the woman he married. He finished the last lock just as the sun started dipping low. At 6:22 p.m., Claire's SUV turned into the driveway. Vic remained by the front door, hands in his pockets, posture calm. She stepped out of the car with 2 grocery bags and an air of forced normalcy. But before she reached the porch, her phone buzzed. She paused, glancing at it. Then again. Buzz. And again. Her expression twisted, confusion turning into annoyance, annoyance into something sharper. She hurried up the steps. Vic, she snapped, not even trying to mask her irritation, my card just declined. Twice. For groceries. What did you do? Vic held her gaze but didn't speak. She pushed past him into the entryway, dropping the bags on the floor so hard a jar clattered sideways. This isn't okay, she said sharply. You don't get to control my money. This is exactly the kind of behavior. Vic still said nothing. Claire stopped mid-sentence, her anger churning into something shaky. You froze everything. Seriously, she laughed once, humorless. Are you trying to punish me? You're acting paranoid. Vic reached into the drawer by the door, slow, calm, deliberate, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He didn't speak as he held it out to her. Claire took it with a huff, ready to continue arguing. Then she looked down. Her face drained of color instantly. The page showed every transfer she'd made over the past year, line by line, date by date, amount by amount. The account in Lucas Barrett's name, the pattern, the withdrawals, the funnel she thought no one would notice. Her mouth opened slightly, as if air had suddenly become hard to find. Vic, she whispered, voice cracking at the edges. This wasn't. Vic said nothing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He just stood there, the silence heavier than any confrontation. Claire stared at the paper again, her fingers trembling now. Her mind was clearly racing, trying to calculate how much he knew when he discovered it, how far the damage had spread. The confidence she'd carried for weeks, maybe months, collapsed right in front of him. Her breathing quickened. You, she tried again, her voice breaking. You weren't supposed to, this is being taken out of context. Still, Vic didn't speak. He watched her eyes dart back and forth as panic replaced anger, fear replaced certainty, and her carefully constructed lie began to crack open. She looked up at him, no longer the confident conspirator he'd overheard in parking lots and condos, but a woman suddenly realizing the ground beneath her was shifting. Vic, she whispered, voice trembling, we should talk. For the first time since she walked in, Vic spoke, quietly, firmly. We will. But not in the way she expected. Not in the way she could control. He stepped back, letting the moment sink in, knowing full well that tonight was only the beginning of her fear. The trap she thought she set. It had officially snapped shut on her. For a few long seconds after Vic handed her the bank transfers, Claire stood frozen in the middle of the living room, fingers trembling around the paper. Her eyes darted across the lines again and again, as if rereading them would somehow make them disappear. Then something in her snapped back into place. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted, and she inhaled through her nose, forcing herself into a posture of control. Fine, she said sharply. You want to play this way, then let's talk facts. Vic didn't speak, he simply waited. Claire stepped closer, the anger returning to her face in waves. I'm your wife, Vic. I'm entitled to half the retirement, half the savings, half the equity. I put years into this marriage. I supported you. The money in those accounts is yours, it's ours. Her voice cracked on that last word, but she masked it quickly. Vic watched her calmly. He'd expected this. Expected the entitlement, the shifting of blame, the attempt to control the narrative. But he didn't feel anger now, just clarity. Quiet, steady clarity. Without a word, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, opened a file, and held it up between them. He pressed play. Claire's voice filled the room instantly, bright, mocking, painfully familiar. He's old, predictable, easy. Her eyes widened. A full second passed where she didn't breathe. Evan's voice followed. Just keep playing nice. He'll sign whatever you put in front of him. Claire stumbled backward slightly, as if the sound itself had pushed her. Her face drained of color completely. "You," she whispered, "you recorded that." Vic said nothing. He didn't have to. Her breathing quickened. Her hands flew to her mouth, then to her hair, then down to her sides, scattered movements of someone losing control. "How long have you been listening?" she demanded, voice trembling. "Where were you? What did you hear?" Vic paused the recording and slipped the phone into his pocket. He didn't answer. Silence was still his weapon. Claire took a shaky step toward him. "Vic, listen, that was your misunderstanding. We were just talking. It wasn't meant." She stopped mid-sentence, swallowing hard, her mind clearly spinning in circles. Then her phone buzzed. She flinched, panicked. Vic watched her eyes flicker with recognition. It was Evan. She grabbed the phone quickly, glancing at the screen before turning away. I need to take this," she muttered, already moving toward the front door. Vic stayed exactly where he was, watching her through the reflection on the glass as she stepped outside into the driveway. The porch light cast her in a pale cone of brightness. He waited 10 seconds, then followed, quietly, just far enough to catch her voice. He tapped record again and held the phone near the partially open window. Claire's voice was frantic. "Evan, he knows. He found the transfers. He froze everything." A pause. Vic could hear Evan's muffled voice but not the words. "Yes," Claire hissed. "He showed me statements, actual statements. He shouldn't have seen any of it." Another pause. Evan said something sharper this time. "Well, what was I supposed to do?" Claire snapped. "You told me it was foolproof. You said he never checked the accounts." Evan's reply was louder now, angry, clipped. Claire's voice broke. Just tell me what to say to him. Tell me how to fix this, Evan, please. I can't let this fall apart." The desperation in her tone struck Vic harder than he expected. She wasn't the confident conspirator from the condo now. She sounded like someone whose safety net had been ripped out from under her. More muffled words from Evan, shorter this time, colder. "No," Claire whispered. "You can't be serious. You're not Evan. Don't you dare do this to me." Silence. Then Claire gasped softly, as if she'd been slapped by the truth. "Evan," her voice wavered. "Evan, Evan." But the call had already ended. Vic watched her arm drop to her side, the phone dangling loosely from her fingers, her entire posture collapsing. She stared at the street as if expecting Evan to appear and take it all back. But the road stayed empty, silent. When she finally turned around, she saw Vic standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. Claire blinked at him, eyes glossy with fear, breath trembling. Her mask cracked so deeply it was barely holding together. For the first time since this began, she wasn't in control. And she knew it. Vic didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything she feared had already begun. The hallway leading to Evan Barrett's condo felt unnaturally quiet, too still for a building that usually hummed with late-evening footsteps and muffled TV noise. Vic stood between Judith Hale and Detective Rhodes, the three of them positioned outside Unit 1407 like a silent firing squad. Rhodes lifted her hand and knocked, firm, official, unforgiving. For a moment there was nothing. Then heavy footsteps approached from inside. A lock clicked, the door CR. "Act open." Evan's face appeared in the gap, confident at first, then flickering with confusion, then panic when he recognized Vic standing only a few feet away. Before he could shut the door, Rhodes wedged her hand in the gap and pushed it fully open. "Detective Lana Rhodes," she said, flashing her badge. "We need to speak with you." Evan attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Now's really not." "We're coming in," Rhodes said flatly. She stepped inside, Hale and Vic following. Evan backed up slowly, forced to retreat into his own living room. The condo looked staged, as though he lived out of suitcases and surfaces rather than the space itself. No warmth, no photographs, no trace of permanence. Evan cleared his throat, arms crossing defensively. "What is this? Why are you here?" Judith Hale set her bag on the counter and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "We're here," she said, "because your little financial side project has finally caught up to you." Evan's jaw flexed. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Rhodes opened a folder, pulling out the first piece of evidence. "You should, Evan. These are the transfer logs you facilitated through your brother's account. Claire Hammond's withdrawals. Nearly $10,000 taken without her husband's knowledge." "That's ridiculous," Evan said quickly. "Claire handled her own money." "And here," Rhodes continued, cutting him off, "is the recording of you discussing a timeline, encouraging her to keep playing nice." She hit play on her phone. Evan's voice filled his own living room. "He's clueless, always has been." Evan inhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. "Look, that's taken out of context. Claire was venting. That doesn't prove fraud." Hale pulled out the condo paperwork next. "Then this must be a coincidence too. Claire co-signing a unit connected to your brother, not you. Asset hiding disguised as real estate acquisition. Very clever, very illegal." Evan's composure cracked for a split second, his eyes darting to the doorway as though looking for an escape route. Vic didn't move. He stayed at the entrance with his arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You don't have anything concrete," Evan said, voice rising. "Nothing you can take to court." Rhodes stepped closer. "Really? Because we also have the messages where you refer to Claire as naive leverage. Want me to read those out loud too?" Evan didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. Rhodes let the moment stretch. "You manipulated her. You groomed her. You set her up to take the fall while you walked away with the assets." Evan opened his mouth to deny it, but the words didn't come. Instead, frustration broke through his mask and he snapped. "She was desperate. She wanted out. I just helped her see the opportunity." The room fell silent. Hale raised an eyebrow. "So you admit you guided her?" Evan's eyes widened. "That's not I didn't mean." But it was too late. A strangled sound came from the front door. Everyone turned. Claire stood there. Her purse hung from her shoulder, her keys still in her hand, her face pale as paper. Vic had never seen a person crumble so fast, her expression shifting from confusion to horror, to something deeper, something that hollowed her completely. She stepped inside slowly, eyes locked on Evan. "You manipulated me," she whispered. Evan stiffened. "Claire, listen." "You told me we were a team," she said, voice shaking. "You told me we were doing this together." Rhodes folded her arms. "He also told his brother you were leverage." Claire's breath hitched. She shook her head over and over as if denial might still save her. No, Evan. Tell them they're wrong." Evan swallowed. "Claire, I didn't say it like that. You're taking it out of context." "Say it," she demanded, voice cracking. "Say you didn't use me." Evan's silence stretched like a blade. Claire's knees buckled. She grabbed the back of a chair to keep from collapsing, tears filling her eyes, her entire body trembling as the truth she had never imagined became undeniable. She had betrayed Vic, risked their home, their finances, their marriage, only to discover she was nothing more than a stepping stone in Evan's scheme. Rhodes spoke quietly. "This is why we're here, to stop him before he drains both of you." Claire sank into the chair, stunned, broken. All the confidence she'd worn for months was gone, stripped away with a single confession. Vic watched from the doorway. Silent. Still. Not triumphant, not spiteful, just steady. Watching the destruction unfold exactly as they had built it. Claire finally lifted her eyes to him, tears streaking her face, a single question trembling on her lips. But Vic didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The truth was standing in the room with them now, and it was louder than anything he could have spoken. The next 48 hours unfolded like a storm Vic had been watching gather on the horizon, dark clouds tightening until the sky finally split. Evan's condo conf. Rontation had been the first crack. What came next was the rupture. Judith Hale called Vic early in the morning, her voice sharper than usual, layered with something that sounded like urgency mixed with disbelief. "Vic," she said without preamble, "you need to come to the office. Immediately." He was already grabbing his keys before she finished the sentence. When he arrived, she was standing by her desk, a stack of documents spread out in front of her like the aftermath of an explosion. Hale wasn't a woman who rattled easily, but her jaw was tight, her eyes unblinking. "What now?" Vic asked. Hale picked up a thin envelope, official, stamped, time-stamped. "This arrived this morning," she said, "addressed to you." Vic took it, opened it. A single page slid out. A notice of default. Home equity line of credit. Balance $240,000. Past due. Vic stared at the numbers, then at Hale, waiting for her to tell him this was a mistake, a misprint, a clerical error. But she didn't. Instead, she pulled forward another stack, photocopies, bank logs, a signature page. "Claire took an equity loan against your home," Hale said quietly. $240,000, without your consent." The room spun. Vic gripped the edge of the desk. "My signature's on file for anything like that," he said, voice rough. "They wouldn't approve without." Hale slid the signature page closer. Vic's breath caught. There on the bottom line was his name, written in strokes meant to mimic his handwriting, the same looping V, the same careful spacing. But it wasn't his. "You didn't sign this," Hale said. "It's a forgery." Vic felt the floor tilt beneath him, rage and disbelief colliding in his chest. He had expected betrayal. He had uncovered lies, but this was something else entirely. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "she put a loan against the house, my house, and now it's in default." Hale nodded. "If we hadn't frozen accounts last week, the bank would have initiated lien proceedings. You were days away from losing everything." Vic sank into the chair behind him, feeling the weight of years press onto his shoulders. This wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't even a financial ambush. Claire had risked the roof over his head, the home he had built plank by plank, the place where every memory of his late wife still lived. "She would have let the house go," Vic whispered. Hale hesitated, then said it gently. "Yes." He rubbed his temples, trying to steady his breathing. Why? Why would she risk something like that? Hale gave him the final answer he didn't know he needed. Because Evan coached her through the entire process. Vic froze. Hale continued. "The bank's verification logs show call patterns. She used his phone number for correspondence. He walked her through the application. He helped her forge your signature." Vic stared at the documents, seeing Claire's handwriting mimic his, imagining Evan leaning over her shoulder, telling her which lines to fill, what to write, how to disguise the fraud so it wouldn't trigger alerts. It made him sick. Before he could speak, Rhodes entered the office, a grim expression on her face. "We've put out the arrest warrant," she said, "for Evan." Vic straightened slowly. "Already?" Rhodes nodded. "After the condo confrontation, he tried to move funds again, thought he could get ahead of us. Bad move on his part." She paused, then added, He won't be slipping away this time. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then at Vic. Evans in custody. The words hit him harder than he expected, relief mixed with a deep, bone-level exhaustion. Justice wasn't swift, but today it was steady. Good, Vic said quietly. But the storm wasn't over. Hale inclined her head toward the door. There's something else. Down the hall in a small conference room, Claire sat alone. Her posture was collapsed, her face streaked with tears, her hair disheveled like she'd been pulling at it. Her hands shook in her lap. She looked nothing like the confident woman clinking wine glasses with Evan and planning her escape. She looked broken. When Vic stepped in, she lifted her head slowly, eyes swollen and bloodshot. "Vic," she whispered, voice cracked raw. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was using me. I didn't know what he was really doing. I never meant for you to lose the house." Vic kept his expression still, quiet, controlled. "You forged my name," he said. Claire sobbed. "He told me you'd never find out. He said it was just temporary. He said it would help us." "Help you," Vic corrected softly, "not me." She broke entirely then, covering her face with her hands, crying in a way that came from somewhere deep. A cry not of guilt, but of consequence, of realizing the man she betrayed had abandoned her the second she became inconvenient. "Vic," she pleaded, reaching toward him, "please, I never wanted." But Rhodes stepped in, her tone professional but not cruel. "Claire Hammond, Ray being charged with forgery, identity misuse, and participation in fraudulent asset transfer." Claire buried her face in her hands again. Vic didn't move. He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak. He didn't soften. She had made her choice long before today. Rhodes glanced at Vic once, giving him the smallest nod, as if acknowledging that everything he had endured had finally reached its turning point. And as Claire was escorted out, her sobs fading down the hallway, Vic stood rooted in place, staring at the stack of documents that had nearly cost him his home, his future, his life's work. This was betrayal doubled. Planned, executed, amplified. But now the tide was turning. And Claire's downfall, like her choices, was entirely her own. The morning Claire moved out felt strangely muted, as if the world itself had lowered its volume. No wind, no birds, just a thin layer of cold Idaho air and the creak of suitcase wheels dragging across the porch. A court order required her to vacate the home within 72 hours. She spent the first 48 crying, pacing, begging, and then, once reality sank in, she spent the last 20 quietly packing her life into boxes that looked too small to hold everything she'd thrown away. Vic stood inside the doorway, arms crossed loosely, not blocking her, not helping her, just watching, not with anger, not anymore. That had burned itself out days ago, leaving something heavier behind, something he couldn't easily name. Hurt, certainly. Betrayal, absolutely. But also a strange remnant of the love he once held for her, a love that had nowhere to go now except backward into memory. Claire avoided his eyes. She lifted one last bag from the floor, her hand trembling. "Vic, I know you don't owe me anything, but if you ever—" He shook his head before she could finish. Not harshly, just firmly. She swallowed the rest of the sentence and nodded like a woman finally accepting a truth she'd tried too long to outrun. She stepped off the porch, placed the bag in the back of her sister's car, and stood still for a long moment. "I did love you," she whispered. Vic didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice, not with the storm of emotions twisting inside him. He just watched her close the car door, watched her sister pull out of the driveway, and watched the woman who once shared his entire world disappear down the street. When the car turned the corner, something in the house shifted. It felt bigger, louder, hollower. And Vic was alone. But for the first time in weeks, the silence felt honest. The next few days became a blur of paperwork, meetings, calls, and numbers. thousands of numbers. Judith Hale worked like a force of nature, moving between courtrooms, calls with the judge, and meetings with bank representatives. She secured restitution orders, froze remaining accounts, and forced the equity lender to cooperate after proving the forged signature. One afternoon, as Vic sat across from her desk, Hale slid a stack of final filings toward him. "We recovered almost everything," she said. "Not without effort, but you're getting it back." Vic scanned the pages, his throat tightening. Months earlier, Claire and Evan had been quietly dismantling his entire life. Now, piece by piece, Hale was stitching it back together. "You should know," she added. "The judge was sympathetic. You've got strong legal standing. The house, your pension, your savings, they're safe." Safe. It was a word Vic hadn't felt in a long time. He nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Judith, really." She gave him a small, earnest smile. "Get some rest, Vic. You've carried too much." He tried, but rest felt like a foreign language. Detective Rhodes called that same evening. Her tone was more businesslike than ever. "We've concluded our investigation," she said. "Evan is tied to every fraudulent action, every transfer, every forged document." Vic leaned against the kitchen counter, the familiar hum of the refrigerator filling the background. "And Claire?" he asked quietly. "She's responsible too," Rhodes said. "But to a lesser degree. She's cooperating. She's admitted everything." Vic closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't sure whether that brought any comfort. Part of him wanted to feel anger again, the clean heat of it. But all he felt was a slow, steady exhaustion. "Thank you," he said finally. Rhodes paused. "You did well, Vic. Not everyone would have handled it with this much restraint." He huffed a faint, humorless breath. "Didn't feel like restraint." "Trust me," she said. "I've seen the alternative." When the call ended, Vic sat at the table alone, hands folded, staring at the wood grain. For the first time, he felt the weight beginning to lift, not gone, not healed, but shifting. In the quiet after the chaos, Glenn McCoy became a regular presence. The old neighbor never pushed. He simply knocked on the door with 2 beers in hand or waved from across the fence while raking leaves. One afternoon, Glenn sat with him on the porch steps, both men looking out over the yard. "You holding up?" he asked. Vic nodded, trying. Glenn grunted softly. "You're doing better than most would." Vic took a slow breath. "Feels like I'm patching a house after a fire. Walls still standing, but nothing feels the same." Glenn tossed the empty bottle into a recycling bin. "Sometimes the rebuild turns out stronger." Vic didn't respond, but the thought sat with him long after Glenn headed home. Over the next week, Vic made small changes, quiet ones, almost invisible unless someone knew what to look for. He cleared Claire's clothes from the closet. He boxed the wedding photos and placed them in the attic. He repaired a loose board on the porch, fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door. He found himself breathing easier in the stillness, in the slow return of a life that was his alone. One night he stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in the cool Boise evening. The air smelled like pine and distant chimney smoke. He stood there for a long time, the quiet settling around him, not heavy anymore, just present. He realized something then. He wasn't just surviving. He was beginning to heal. Not fully, not quickly, but enough to stand straighter, enough to breathe deeper, enough to finally feel like himself again. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Vic understood. Peace wasn't something someone else could give him. It was something he was relearning to build. One quiet night at a time. Vic woke before sunrise most mornings now. Not because of worry, those days had finally begun to recede, but because the quiet hours felt like space, he needed to rebuild the pieces of himself Claire had chipped away. The house was still standing, but it carried scars, financial ones, emotional ones, and memories that stung if he lingered too long. So he didn't linger. He worked. It started with small things. Repainting a hallway Claire always complained was too dark. Fixing the porch rail she insisted they didn't need to spend money on. Replacing old light fixtures with warm, soft ones he liked. Then it grew bigger. He tore up the worn carpet in the living room and laid new hardwood himself, slow and careful, the way he used to when he was a contractor. His hands remembered the rhythm even if his heart was still learning how to beat steadily again. Every nail he set, every board he cut, felt like reclaiming something she had tried to take. One afternoon, he pulled out an old cedar chest he hadn't opened in years, the one filled with his woodworking tools, blades still sharp, handles worn from decades of use. Claire always said the chest cluttered the garage, urging him to give up the hobby because no one buys handcrafted pieces anymore. But now, the chest felt like a doorway back to a life he had abandoned without realizing it. He built a small bench first, then a birdhouse, then a set of simple shelves that he mounted in the living room. Each project steadied him, returning him to something familiar, something honest. Outside, the weather grew cooler, signaling the early lean of fall. Vic began hiking again, taking the old trail behind the ridge where the pines thickened and the ground dipped toward the creek. He hadn't been up there in years. Claire always claimed the hikes were too long, too cold, too pointless, and he had let himself give in. Now he moved through the trees with slow, steady breaths, the earth crunching beneath his boots, the quiet settling into him in a way that felt like healing. Sometimes he stopped at a clearing where the wind carried a faint whistle through the pines. He stood there, letting the air touch the pain still lodged under his ribs, letting it soften just enough to keep moving. Detective Rhodes called him one Thursday afternoon. Her voice held a strain he recognized from months earlier, but now it wasn't directed at him. It was the weight of finality. Evan accepted a plea deal, she said. Fraud, identity misuse, conspiracy. He's looking at real time, Vic. Years. Vic exhaled slowly, gripping the phone. Good, he said, not with vengeance, not with triumph, just with quiet certainty. And Claire, he asked. She's cooperating, Rhodes said. Her charges are lighter. Community supervision, restitution agreements, mandatory financial counseling. Considering her involvement, she's getting off easier than most would. Vic didn't react. He didn't need to. Claire's consequences were hers to carry now, no longer his burden, no longer his responsibility. Hank you, he said. You did everything right, Rhodes replied. Take that with you. When the call ended, Vic stood in the middle of the living room for a long moment, breathing deeply, allowing the sense of closure to settle around him. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like space, like room to grow again. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten envelope, familiar looping script, Claire S. Vic held it for a full minute before setting it on the kitchen counter unopened. He didn't need to read apologies written after consequences landed. He didn't need explanations she should have offered before she betrayed him. Some things, he realized, are closed chapters, even if the other person wants to keep writing. The letter remained there for days. Eventually, he placed it in a drawer in the hallway, out of sight, not out of anger but out of peace. It didn't belong in the story he was building now. Hale called soon after with the final paperwork. It's done, she said. The divorce is finalized. Terms are strongly in your favor. You keep the house, the pension, the savings. She forfeits all claims. Vic ran a hand over his face, absorbing each word. It was surreal, how the life he thought was ending months ago was instead rerouting itself, steadier and stronger than he expected. Thank you, Judith, he said, for everything. She gave him a small laugh. Just don't get married again without running background checks. He smiled for the first time that week. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. People he barely spoke to came by with casseroles, homemade pies, sympathy and support that surprised him. Not pity, genuine care. Glenn visited almost daily now, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with silence. Both were welcome. One evening, Glenn joined him on the porch, handing him a thermos. "Cold night," he said. Vic nodded. "Feels good." They sat in easy silence, watching the sun sink behind the pines. Eventually, Glenn spoke. "You're looking steadier." Vic took a slow breath. "Feels that way." A long pause. "You deserved better," Glenn said. "Maybe," Vic replied, "but I survived worse." Glenn chuckled softly. "And now you're rebuilding." Vic looked at the freshly installed porch light, the refinished steps, the new hardwood visible through the window, the shelves he'd crafted by hand. "I am," he said. And for the first time since everything began, he truly meant it. The ground beneath him, once ripped apart by betrayal, finally felt solid again. Vic drove back to the lakeside cabin on a cool Saturday morning, the same one where everything had begun. The lies, the unraveling, the discovery that gutted him. But today the drive felt different. He wasn't sneaking, hiding, or bracing for pain. He was returning by choice, seeking something he wasn't sure he could name. Maybe peace, maybe distance, maybe a place to lay down the weight he'd carried for too long. The cabin looked the same as the night he'd first stayed there. Weathered wood, soft moss along the steps, tall pines leaning gently toward the water. But the man walking up the porch now was not the man who had come here weeks ago. That version of himself, nervous, confused, desperate to prove or disprove a suspicion, felt like someone from another lifetime. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine and old timber. Vic set his bag on the table and stood still, listening to the quiet. No voices, no lies, no tension humming under his skin, just the soft whisper of lake water moving against the shore. He sat in the same wooden chair where he'd listened to Claire's betrayal through the window of his own home, and for the first time he allowed himself to think about that man, about who he had been before everything fell apart. He remembered the way he used to trust instinctively, love without hesitation, believe the best in the woman beside him. That man had been gentle, hopeful, even a little naive. He felt grief for him, but he also felt gratitude. Because that man had given the current version of him something precious, clarity. Vic stepped out onto the porch. The lake stretched wide and still, a perfect mirror of sky. He breathed in the crisp air, and it settled in his chest like a slow unfurling. He didn't hear the car until it was almost at the cabin. Tires moved over gravel, then stopped. Detective Rhodes stepped out, hands in her jacket pockets, her expression its usual blend of calm and unspoken empathy. "Didn't think I'd find you here," she said, walking up the steps. Victor offered a subtle nod, figured it was time to come back. Rhodes leaned on the railing beside him, looking out at the water. "Thought you'd want updates." Evan formally entered his plea. No negotiations left. He's going away for a long time. Vic exhaled, the breath long and relieved. "Good." "And Claire?" he asked, though there was no anger in it, just a quiet need to know. "She's cooperating, following court orders. She's facing consequences, but she's stable." Rhodes paused, then added, "She mentioned wanting to apologize someday, but I told her to stay away unless you choose otherwise." Vic nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." They stood in silence for a moment, wind moving softly through the pines. Rhodes glanced at him. "You're doing better," she said. Vic looked at the lake again, trying. "That's enough," she replied, giving him a final pat on the shoulder before heading back to her car. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." When she left, the quiet returned, not empty, but comforting. Vic went back inside and pulled a blank notebook from his bag. He sat at the small kitchen table, opened to the first page, and began writing. At first the words came slowly, halting, stiff. But soon they flowed, not as anger or accusation, but as truth. He wrote everything. The distance he'd felt in Claire long before the betrayal, the moment he heard Evan's laugh inside his home, the recordings, the financial devastation, the confrontation at the condo, the arrests, the aftermath. He wrote until his hand cramped, until the sun dipped low and shadows grew long across the cabin floor. When he finally set the pen down, he felt lighter, like something knotted inside him had unspooled at last. As twilight spread across the lake, he stepped outside again. The water glimmered with soft purples and fading golds. A loon called in the distance, a lonely sound but not a sad one. Vic looked around the cabin, the place that had held his darkest moments and now held the beginning of his healing. He realized he didn't want to leave it behind. He wanted to claim it, own it, make it his. The decision settled into him quietly, naturally. He would buy the cabin, make it a refuge, a place untouched by deceit or betrayal, a place to start again. As the last light faded, Vic sat on the porch steps, breathing deeply, the quiet washing over him in slow waves. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. Thanksgiving morning arrived quiet and cold, the kind of Idaho morning where the lake looked like glass and the air smelled faintly of snow. Vic woke before dawn in the cabin that no longer felt borrowed or temporary, but something he was slowly claiming as his own. The place had begun to absorb him in gentle ways. The steadiness of the wood, the calm of the water, the silence that no longer felt threatening. He moved into the small kitchen, rolling his sleeves past his elbows and setting ingredients on the counter. Cooking, for one, didn't bother him anymore. In fact, there was a strange comfort in it. He seasoned the turkey the way his late wife used to, chopped vegetables with a rhythm that returned after years of neglect, and simmered gravy on the stovetop while the cabin warmed around him. As he worked, he let the quiet sift through him, pulling old pain up and out, leaving something steadier behind. He thought of Claire, but not with bitterness, just with distance. She belonged to another chapter now, a chapter closed so firmly that even memory couldn't reopen it. By early afternoon, the cabin smelled rich and inviting. Vic set the table for one, simple, no flourish, and stepped outside to breathe in the crisp air while the turkey rested. The lake was calm, the sky pale, the world holding its breath before winter set in. He didn't expect company. So when tires crunched softly over the gravel path, Vic turned with mild surprise. Glenn stepped out of his old pickup, bundled in a flannel jacket, holding a foil-covered dish like it was something fragile. "Hope you've got room," Glenn said, lifting the dish slightly. "Pumpkin pie. My daughter says it's award-winning. I say it's just decent." Vic felt his lips lift into a small smile. "You didn't have to drive all the way out here." "Yeah," Glenn grunted, "but you shouldn't be alone today, not after the year you've had." Vic didn't argue. He just opened the door and waved him in. Inside, Glenn inhaled deeply. "Smells better than my place," he said. "And trust me, that's not a compliment to you. That's an insult to my cooking." Vic laughed, not just a polite chuckle, but a laugh so natural it startled him. It loosened something in his chest that had been tight for months. They sat at the small table, filling their plates without ceremony. For a while they ate in silence, the kind of comfortable quiet two older men could share without needing to fill it. Eventually Glenn leaned back with a soft groan. "You know," he said, wiping his beard, "you handled everything better than most would've. Betrayal like that. Some men never come back." Vic nodded slowly. "It changed me, no way around that." "Change isn't always bad," Glenn said. "Sometimes it just trims the branches that weren't growing right." Vic considered that, sipping his water. "I trusted her," he said quietly. "Even when things felt off, I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt." "That's not weakness," Glenn replied. "That's loyalty, but loyalty's only worth something, and it's a two-way street." Vic exhaled, gaze drifting toward the window where snow clouds began forming in the distance. "I'd forgotten what it feels like to be around someone honest." Glenn chuckled. "Careful now, you keep talking like that, I'll start charging for therapy." Vic laughed again, shaking his head. "You're a good friend, Glenn." "Damn right," Glenn said, raising his glass. "And I plan on sticking around to make sure you don't go getting yourself in another mess." Vic lifted his glass too, feeling warmth spread through him, not from the drink but from the moment, from the company, from the realization that betrayal hadn't left him alone. It had revealed who truly remained. "To knowing who's really on your side," Vic said. Their glasses clinked softly. Outside, the first snowflakes drifted down, gentle, unhurried, landing on the porch rail and melting into tiny silver beads. The sky dimmed a shade, twilight settling early as it often did in late fall. Vic watched the snowfall through the window, an unexpected swell of gratitude filling him, not sharp, not overwhelming, but soft and steady. Gratitude for survival, for clarity, for a future no longer tethered to deception. For the first time in months, grief didn't sit heavy on his chest. Instead, he felt whole. Whole and healing. The snow continued falling, quiet as forgiveness, quiet as a new beginning. The morning Vic returned home from the cabin, the sky was pale and quiet, the kind of winter blue that made everything feel sharper, clearer. Frost clung to the edges of the windows as he stepped inside the house, his house, and paused in the entryway. He let the silence wash over him for a moment, letting himself feel the weight of where he stood. These rooms had nearly been stolen from him. Not just the walls and floors, but the memories, the routines, the life he had built board by board over decades. He moved slowly through the house, like he was seeing it with new eyes. The living room where he once dozed off in his recliner after long days. The kitchen where he'd cooked countless dinners, unaware Claire was already slipping away. The hallway where he used to hear her footsteps late at night, long before he knew what they meant. He ran his hand along the edge of the doorway, the wood warm from morning sun. The ache inside him was softer now, less jagged. Not gone, but manageable. He had expected this walkthrough to feel like reopening a wound. Instead, it felt like closing one. He climbed the stairs, each step familiar, steady. At the top, he paused, pulling his phone from his pocket. The recording, the one that changed everything, still sat at the top of his files, marked and saved. For a moment, he just stared at it, thumb hovering over the play button. Then he pressed it. Claire's voice echoed through the hallway. "He's old, predictable, easy." Evan's laugh followed, cutting through him like it had the first night he heard it. "Just keep playing nice. He'll sign whatever you put in front of him." Vic didn't flinch this time. The sting was duller now, like a bruise fading. He listened to the entire thing, every word, every mocking laugh, every betrayal laid bare. When it ended, he closed his eyes and whispered into the quiet. "That night saved my life." Because it had. The betrayal he feared had become the truth he needed. A truth that pushed him out of denial, out of complacency, out of a marriage that had been dying quietly long before he tested her loyalty. He slipped the phone into his pocket and headed downstairs, exhaling slowly as he reached the kitchen table. A neat stack of documents waited there, Hale's final filings. The last of it, the legal end, the closing of a chapter he never imagined would be written. Vic sat pen in hand and read through the final page: divorce decree, asset confirmations, restitution schedules, Claire's forfeited claims, her signature shaky, his signature line blank. He pressed the pen to paper. With one slow, steady stroke, he signed his name. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt peaceful. He gathered the documents, slid them into the return envelope, and stood. As he walked to the front door, he felt a shift inside him, subtle but real, like he had finally stepped out of a shadow he'd been living in without noticing. He opened the door and stepped outside. The morning air was cold enough to sting his lungs, crisp and clean, carrying the smell of pine from the backyard. Snow still clung to the edges of the porch, thin and sparkling. Vic breathed in deeply, letting the cold settle into him, grounding him. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't grieving anymore. He wasn't waiting for answers or closure. He was done. And for the first time since everything unraveled, he didn't feel lost. He felt free. Completely, unmistakably free. He looked out at the yard, the place he had nearly been forced to walk away from, and felt something inside him expand. A sense of new beginnings, of possibility, of quiet strength return into its rightful place inside him. He spoke softly, not to anyone in particular, but to the life that waited ahead of him. I tested her loyalty, and what I saw didn't break me. It set me free.